Incentive for fraudsters to see and gain from it. There's too much money that's going into digital. There is rampant increment of investments that are happening there, and giving the fragmentation and technology gaps in understanding where the money is going, and the supply chain is not completely clean. All of that are reasons really why I believe this is happening. So that's the reason.
You've really sidestepped my question, but I understand. But let me bring you on, Uday, and I really want you to wear the hat of a publisher here and not of a client, although you wear both. And as wearing the hat of a publisher, would you say that the entire ecosystem is thriving on greed and vanity metrics, and which is why clients should take ownership of the fact that they drive these metrics, and hence there is not only existence, but thriving and growing of the fraud.
So you are right to an extent that there is a fair amount of chasing of vanity metrics out there. But let's step back a little. I think it's important to understand that the entire digital environment, digital advertising environment has been around for the last 5 to 7 years, really matured in India over the last 5 to 7 years. The mainstream advertisers have really taken to digital advertising maybe in the last 5 to 7 years. Before that, it was purely digital advertisers, digital clients. And I think there's a whole process of learning what's happening, what are the metrics to track. And I think there is a challenge in the market on awareness. And I don't think too many CMOs today pay attention to ad fraud and the amount of leakage that it can cause. So I think before we really jump the gun and hang somebody out there as to who's responsible for it.
No, I haven't got there at all. I'm just warming up. I'm just asking the question whether their motivation to really,
I don't think anybody is looking for a shortcut from a client perspective
what are you
or from
saying?
a publisher.
All clients want viral videos. All clients want
wanting a viral video is not ad fraud.
Grand number of crossing million and billions of views and shares. We get press releases galore every day about this campaign has got so many views, so many shares. So I mean, don't tell me they're not chasing those metrics.
So I think chasing metrics is different from saying that there is a leakage in terms of ad fraud. I think I would be more worried about ad fraud when there is lack of awareness at the client end to say, I've put in 100 rupees, but that 100 rupees is actually only 50 rupees is going into a valuable campaign, and 50 rupees is really getting leaked out. And that leakage is they're not aware of where the leakage is happening. I think there is enough technology today, both in terms of protecting yourself, ensuring no ad fraud is happening. It's like saying, I have a bank, but I'm not going to have a guard, and say nobody's going to take away the money from your bank. Because you have a bank and because you have a vault out there which has money, you have that everybody is aware of what are the ways in which ad fraud can happen and how each one of us can help each other protect.
It's very nice of you. You really sound like the Pope on this panel.
I did my job.
But let's hope for a more pointed view from InMobi. Large players. Tell me, can you answer the question saying, do you think that that they are driving this, by wrong motivation?
Yes, I think you're asking what's motivating this whole ad fraud, right?
Yeah.
I think I'll just take an example. Say there's this company who got $500 million funding. Now, they got the funding on growth because they're in the growth market, and India is a growth market. Now, they know this time is taking, and in 3 years, they need to burn this. And the pressure, like you said, right, any CMO or CDO, for next 2 to 3 years has to just grow it. If it doesn't grow, then the guy is chucked out and somebody else.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, obviously, the real motivation is always money. But this whole media flow that happens that, you have to burn this money and you have to grow at that pace and you have to set that record, kind of incentivizes everybody in the channel to say that if you don't meet this metric, this money is not coming to you. And if it's not coming, the business is not happening. I think that's driving this whole chain. Not that people are wanting to do this, but it is being like, if you're not doing it, somebody else is doing it. And hence that money on the table is making everybody drool on it. Now again, not everybody is doing really, really bad, because there are like companies who just do fraud, right? That's something that we need to weed out. But once you do that, the second part that comes in is, these days advertisers are asking for really, really tough KPIs. They want to pay very less but get the most out of it. Now that's the second part of choking that is causing, because if you're not doing it, somebody else is doing. Like affiliate would do it or somebody else would do it. And hence I think it's a combination of those things put together creates this behavioral thing. That's how I would put it.
Yeah, very well articulated. Mohit, do you agree with what he has to say? And what's your sense of the fact that because of this pressure that is created within the ecosystem, which is basically, each one is feeling the pressure, every stakeholder, how do you think digital agencies are currently conducting themselves? Is there a lot more to be desired from their behavior?
I think first I'll just second what I hear here. So see, it's the way it works in the real world is that when you actually sit on an Excel and you want some numbers, final numbers to be achieved, you start crunching numbers, and Excel finally gives up and gives you what you want, right? So so the same way, when a client decides to if at the board, some metrics have to be have been set out, which the team has to achieve, and so those metrics have to be achieved, and it really is basis the maturity of the client, what stage of business they are at, etc. So, and I've seen journeys, from app install campaigns, from cost per install to a cost per registration to a cost per engagement for X period of time to a cost per transaction, and there's fraud everywhere. And so this is on the client side, and then of course a brief like this comes to the agency, to my friend here, Deepak. So so they're just better experts in terms of breaking numbers on Excel, and and probably giving their output faster. So I'm not saying that, but because that's the that if things flow like that. So yeah, so that's the real world, and everything actually starts from a client and what they are expecting, and but it changes from the maturity level of the brand or the client. I mean, we see some of the younger brands asking, trying to do different things, but more mature brands, who have seen it all, etc., dealing with this very differently. So yeah, that's where it is. And then it also matters, essentially there are. I'll just take one more minute. So your digital plans really come down to three things: either you're putting some money on the platform, or you're putting some money on the X number of websites, or there is some kind of a data play, the banks and all of that. So so it's where the larger fraud is actually around programmatic websites, etc. Platforms are that way relatively safer, and data fraud is actually, I spoke about it earlier also, is a big one.
Sure, but very quickly, Mohit, who do you think the buck should stop at? The brand owner, or people who are aiding the brand?
So I think there is for the larger platforms. I mean, and I'll include Google, Facebook, Geo. We have a certain responsibility towards because somewhere we know that it is if you're generating X number of impressions, that's generating X number of clicks, and that's generating X number of purchase intents or final transactions, etc., and what's working, what's not working, and all of that. So we should proactively go back and tell the brand that and probably suggest slightly with variations here and there, because from our side it's very important that our platform is top of the class and it is delivering the metrics. Even if the brand, even though the client doesn't understand that, we need to do some education there. So I think that's Geo definitely takes that responsibility.
So you're saying the social media behemoths need to.
Sorry.
You're saying the social media players need to take accountability of this. The buck should stop there.
Yeah, the buck starts from the client, but it
should stop there.
It should, so Again, I'm telling you, so we can only suggest, we can only
and
propose.
we're just having a debate.
But
Yeah,
just to own the fact that the buck should stop here, I think the buck should stop where it has started. So,
Okay, let me get in the other client, which is Rahul. Are you first? Are you in agreement that the fact that today being a CMO is intense pressure, and hence you might be guilty of chasing vanity metrics?
First of all, I think it's a very unfair panel here, right? We have one client versus 6 people bouncing on. So otherwise, just to add what Uday also mentioned in the beginning, I would say we are basically client is where the buck will start, right?
Sure.
He was pointing the same thing out here. And if you look at the platforms, I think platforms today, whether it is social media platforms or big platforms like InMobi, they have some responsibility towards the client in terms of making sure that they're able to deliver what my expectations are, right? Today, if I'm going on a big e-commerce platform doing some purchase, it is the responsibility of that particular marketplace to ensure they deliver the value which I'm swiping my card for, right? You can't go back to the client and say, it was, you wanted it at 600 rupees and the cost is 1200, so this is what you'll get, right? So there is some responsibility with the platform where I'm going out and putting my banners on in terms of making sure the value is getting delivered. I think that is number one. Second, to Uday's point, over the last 3-4 years, we've seen a lot of offline advertisers moving online. Yeah. So it requires certain amount of education, right, for the offline players.
Who's going to educate?
The intermediaries. So if I'm hiring a consultant, if
MMA.
I'm hiring an agency.
MMA.
Okay.
So whether it is MMA or I would say if I'm hiring an agency today, right, I'm partnering with an agency, whether it is a Group M, I'm hiring them for their capability as a consultant, right? So it is their responsibility to ensure. So I am not shrugging my responsibilities. So I'm saying my expectations as a client has to be realistic. The agency has to play their role in terms of making sure they are consulting, they are educating me, they are giving me the benefits of the medium, and the platforms in terms of.
I have a question. Let's say that he's servicing you. He's the agency, right? Is he incentivized depending on the amount of likes, impressions, shares, and whatever else in that mix, in that metrics he delivers to you? Is his incentivized or his entire remuneration based on that?
So I think that depends.
No, don't tell me
No,
that
so
depends.
I'm saying, so that depends on the objective of the client, right?
No,
so
but give me a generic answer.
So I would say,
In most cases, let's look at most
cases. For
an
offline guy moving online, maybe getting a like is, it will give him a good high. He'll say, okay, I've got 1 million likes. But for a digital advertiser, he knows the value of a like, right? So for a digital advertiser, he understands. So I think it is, again, I would, put the
why
buck
don't
back.
you answer the question?
So, of course,
don't
there are
layer it, just answer the
there are
question.
pseudo metrics obviously we chase. I wouldn't lie. There are metrics that we chase from clients. It's not upfront on paper, but when you're having these conversations, there is always some bit of there is banter that okay, why didn't I get X many likes, X many engagements or comments on my campaign? But times are moving. That's a lot has changed from what we started off, let's say 6-7 years back. And I think the conversation now has, especially with evolved digital advertisers, is not just likes and comments and engagement anymore. I think it's evolved. So it's about what is the end goal that the campaign is really driving? What's the business that the campaign
So are you
is
saying
driving?
you're not remunerated by your deliverables today?
Not totally on likes and shares. That's not the remuneration that we get.
So are you remunerated for conversions, actual conversions?
So yeah, it depends on the campaign types you're signing up for, right?
Such a vague
No, so
answer.
let me
Neither
add
the
here.
audience
Different
nor
types
me.
of
So I
campaigns that
think
we sign up for. I mean,
it clearly, so it depends on the client, right? For an agency, they would want to sign up a client for a like, right? If the client is educated enough, coming back to Uday's point, if the client knows what they want, client knows the capability of the medium, they would go till the end result.
Got it.
Right?
So now tell me, great. So now tell me, in the ecosystem, large ecosystem, let's just look at the Indian market. How many sophisticated digital advertisers do we have who are actually following what you're saying? And what he's also, pushing, which is that they are not going for shares, likes, they're looking at the end goal, the bigger picture, all of that, right? How many in percentage, how many advertisers are actually of that league?
So I think it would be 50-50 if I give.
Really?
It would be a
Wow,
50-50. And if
wow,
you look
that's
at.
pretty big. That's pretty
But
big.
if you look at by value, I think.
Might be much more.
Yeah?
In terms of value, I would imagine the big spenders today, and maybe Deepak can back that, the big spenders today know what they're doing. It's the big spenders are also directly dealing with large platforms. So the chances of a client dealing directly with a large platform reduces the amount of intermediate and therefore drops the amount of fraud that can happen. So I think we're moving from more and more money moving to safer platforms, more checks and balances, more awareness of this problem. And I think fundamentally, this is a problem of people knowing or brands knowing that there is a problem if I'm not careful about where my ad shows, how my ad shows, what are my metrics, how am I going to track it, is there any check and balance in the system? And if you're tracking all of that, the chances are that you'll be hit with less ad fraud, not zero ad fraud,
Sure.
with less ad fraud. And I think all objective of, and I'm also an advertiser, and I'm saying for us, all this adds up, and we are saying, have we figured out a way of reducing ad fraud?
I'm very curious to ask all advertisers, are you in agreement?
Yeah, kind of, but I'll just give you the
Yeah,
exact
yeah,
numbers.
yeah, sure,
But
yeah, yeah.
so exact numbers are, so in India, there are about 50 big brands which spend more than 100 crores. And they are, let's say, fall on that matured spectrum. And there'll be about close to 10,000 brands, I'm talking about 10,000 companies, not brands as such, who would, what you call as a long tail. And I think and these 10,000 guys do smaller campaigns, the SMEs, and then in fact there's a much bigger number out there as well, but that's too big to track. So I think role of agencies become way more important when we're dealing with these 10,000 set of people in terms of handholding and putting the right medium, because it's very easy to say that that platform is a safer bet and whitelisted websites are the best thing, etc. But for some of the brands, they have to go down to this larger universe out there, and there's lots going on. There's a whole circular economy going on between, if you've seen, what happens with gaming, there are multiple brands. That's a bigger subject. But yeah, I just want to ask the exact numbers, and broadly, those are the numbers for India.
So you're saying, the 50% of the sophisticated, the large brands who are spending about 100 crores.
There's a
or
50
so.
brands, approximately.
Yeah, yeah.
They spend about 1/3 of the addicts.
So yeah.
Just in terms of numbers.
So you're saying 1/3 of the addicts today has matured, has gone past this phase.
Yes.
Can you say that with confidence?
No, I say it with the confidence. I think they say it with the confidence in terms of maturity level, but I think what this last 50 brands are not kind of realized, because things have changed so fast in India, they're still holding on to large spends on TV because it is safe, etc.
Yeah.
Where the ad fraud numbers are actually way bigger. I'm sorry, I'm just stating that once again. But so somewhere I think so that the digital maturity still has to get integrated inside these 50 brands. That should happen quickly. And India as a country, we should do 50-60% on digital, not 20%. Where it is.
Sure.
Once that maturity cycle comes.
Sure.
I think if we talk about the traditional, since you touched on traditional medium, I think the traditional CMOs start with a 50% cut, right? So there's a notion, they say, 50% of the ad spends will always go waste, right? So they start with a 50% cut. But when we talk about the new age digital CMOs who understand the capability of the mediums, who have capable partners like these out there who are educating the clients and not trying to take them for a ride, I think the internet platform has more trackability and more, you get more bang for the buck.
Yeah, but then there's a larger question, and that can be another debate on the efficacy that the digital medium actually serves versus traditional. But that's a separate issue. But I just want to bring you in because you've just been an observer, so you have the advantage of being the last man to speak, to give your point of view. So while we've seen a lot of mature advertisers now, cropping up, and we've seen the fact that he's saying, more and more people are much more vigilant and much more careful. Would you agree that the ecosystem is actually functioning like that?
I won't, unfortunately.
Thank you.
And let me start with a few points which I observed on the discussion. Is why should there be A, vanity metrics, and B, performance? Why not both? Is it too much to ask for an advertiser who's spending millions of dollars saying, give me vanity metrics and give me performance? What's the problem in having both? The thought that vanity metrics can be fake and will be fake is not necessarily true. The point is that you can actually get both, number one. Number two is, I think anyone who's involved in the media pipe, who's either a publisher or an agency or someone who's getting a pie of the media spend, cannot be responsible for the buck to stop, right? Because they have a vested interest. The platforms will be more interested in ensuring that they have a higher media share and a media spend rather than trying to figure out of maturing the client, of not doing things which are not in the interest of the client. So I think a neutral, independent validator, enforcer is critical. Otherwise, the people who are responsible for media would obviously prioritize media over everything else. The third point which I wanted to, and again, slightly controversial, my sense is that advertisers have still not matured enough to start asking the right questions. Advertisers still end up assuming that fraud is only about bad traffic. In fact, I once wanted to revise the definition of yours, which you started the session. Ad fraud is not about bad traffic. Ad fraud now means also organic theft. I can actually have sales which are fraudulent. I can actually have leads which are fraudulent. I can actually have conversions which are fraudulent. What that means is fraud has moved to the level where someone can steal your organic traffic and show it as if they have done that advertising for you. So what that means is you can actually get the best performance. You can have a source which is giving you thousands of dollars of sales and orders, right? Genuine sales and orders. But guess what? All of that can be fraud because that publisher or that source basically ate away your organic and packaged it to show it as an organic, right? What that means is that if the targets towards agencies, measurement criteria towards publishers is, hey, give me an ROI and you're good to go, I can actually meet all ROIs and I can actually still do fraud. So I think the definition for advertisers need to change. It's not about only bad traffic. Even very good traffic can be really bad. If it is good traffic, you're probably being duped. That's actually the scarier part. Because now you can't just look at KPIs and say, if I'm getting my KPIs, then how can that be wrong? So my sense is advertisers obviously need to be mature. They need to understand these questions. They need to understand good and bad traffic. Neutrality of a platform to validate the whole information and ensure that no one is taking the advertiser for a ride is, I think, something important. And I think I can go ahead and stick my neck out and say, I think the buck stops with us.
Wow.
We can actually ensure that advertisers are configuring the right thing, they're setting the right KPIs, they're setting the right rules. Agencies, publishers are ensuring that those are being met. And if someone is not meeting the required criteria, then we should be able to flag that off because our interest is not the media spend. Our interest is ensuring the best interest for the
I
advertiser.
really want to know what Rohit has to say. You agree that the buck stops with you?
I do not know whether I can, confer on that because to detect fraud, you need access to the data so that you can really say. I think all the parties that are involved in this equation have a shared responsibility because everybody has some KPI to meet, whether you like it or not, because that's how the business will run. Now, everybody, like if somebody is doing, fraud identification, yes, their job will be around fraud identification. Now, if they get incentivized towards more and more fraud identification, they'll increase the threshold and, there will be an error there also. So each one get incentivized and appropriately will add their share of the fraud part, right? Whether you like it or not. Not trying to pick on you, but generally saying it. So it's largely a human thing, but I feel it's a shared responsibility. And if advertiser believes that yes, they're willing to pay a little extra for the ROI they want to get and create this consortium, which is a neutral consortium, which works which defines like we have data regulation, right? It's the same thing we should define the ad regulation, right? How does an ad actually, like ad viewability and all these things comes in, brand safety to the third party, right? Until those things are in place, and if the platform showcases that they're respecting those regulations, I think that can bring in a sanity into the whole system rather than saying that we're going to fight this corruption.
Well, I never started this debate or discussion thinking that we would have a conclusion. it was, set in stone that there would not be a conclusion. But I mean, kudos to you for taking responsibility and saying the buck stops at you. At least we have, some kind of conclusion for this debate, maybe not the actual debate globally. But on that note, thank you very much. I'm out of time. Thank you for this very, very insightful debate. And hopefully we'll see many more mature advertisers and agencies and enablers emerge from this market. Thank you very much.